This week in Jamaica Now, unconstitutional. A court says a 2018 state of emergency in St. James violated a man's rights. The state is to pay him approximately $18 million. Spanish Town mayhem, gang feuds prompt SOE declaration in the old capital.
The government of Jamaica cannot sit by and see innocent Jamaicans going about their business on their way to work or from the market and having to be scurrying for their lives.
Decision day, Chief Justice Byran Sykes to hand down major ruling in Klansman case on June 20. And the PNP revises its shadow cabinet. I'm Jovan Johnson and this is Jamaica Now. A court has ruled that regulations that govern the 2018 state of emergency violated a citizen's rights to liberty and freedom of movement. The Constitutional Court made the declaration on Friday in a case brought by St. James taximan Roshane Clark. The state has been ordered to pay Mr. Clark approximately $18 million for breaching his constitutional rights. In his lawsuit, Mr. Clark asserted that his right to liberty, to be informed at the time of his detention of the reason for his arrest, and to be brought before a court as soon as it is reasonably practicable, were breached. The court said the SOE regulations on rights to liberty and movement gave the authorities unduly unfettered power to abrogate the fundamental rights of a wide class of persons in society without evidence establishing that they were reasonably justified for achieving the purposes of the state of emergency. It's the second major court ruling that has determined that regulations under the state of emergency violated the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. And Friday's court decision came just hours after Prime Minister Andrew Holness declared a state of emergency in St. Catherine amid a deadly wave of violence gripping areas including the capital Spanish Town. The SOE allows the security forces or authorized persons enhanced powers of search and arrest and limit the right of detained persons to due process. The Prime Minister says the government was forced to take action because of the high levels of crime.
The government has to act. That is the government's responsibility. We, of course, must act within the boundaries of our laws and constitution. And we rely on our courts to give us guidance and interpretation. And we will always dutifully, responsibly follow the guidance of the courts as they interpret the law. As we see the law, and we go through our interpretation as well, we make the best policies that we can until the courts pronounce. But it must never be said that the government did not act. As Prime Minister, you elected me to discharge my duties fully in support of the defense of the first and most important right, which is the right to life.
And the residents of Spanish Town have welcomed the SOE declaration. Earlier this week, at least 3 men were shot dead in incidents linked to an internal feud in the One Order gang that's based in St. Catherine. Shoppers and residents had to flee as bullets were traded in the Market District and surrounding areas. Following the mayhem, the Prime Minister said his government's response to crime was being hampered because of debates about human rights. The government has been intent on using states of emergency in normal policing, arguing that the high levels of crime in Jamaica require the use of tougher measures. But the opposition People's National Party, human rights groups like the Jamaicans for Justice, and some lawyers have questioned the role of SOEs. And Member of Parliament for St. Catherine Central, Olivia Babsy-Grange, says she has not heard any reports from communities in her constituency suggesting that the One Order gang is behind the latest upsurge of deadly violence in Spanish Town. The Jamaica Constabulary Force says an internal feud in the gang that started from last September is causing the problems in St. Catherine. Mrs. Grange, who is a member of the ruling Jamaica Labour Party, says the conflict has been driven by elements from a neighbouring constituency, St. Catherine South Central, which is represented by her party colleague, Dr. Andrew Wheatley.
Well, I'm not involved in a gang, so I can't tell you if it's a breakaway faction from a gang. Once there are incidents that are connected to the communities that are in strong support of the Jamaica Labour Party, then the elements that are involved are labeled One Order. But what I can tell you, I haven't heard the name one order called in the communities around for a long time. They have been focused on how they can improve their lives.
Meanwhile, there is heightened public attention on the Klansman One Don gang trial underway in the Supreme Court. Klansman is the other major criminal organization operating in St. Catherine. Chief Justice Byran Sykes is to rule on Monday on the no-case submissions made for the 24 of the 28 remaining alleged gangsters in the case, including reputed leader Andre Blackman Bryan. That means if the judge does not believe the prosecution has made out a credible case against the defendants, the cases against them will have to be dismissed. The high-profile case started last September with 33 defendants, including one woman. 5 have so far been freed. My colleague Tanisha Mundell has been covering the trial and joins me now. Tanisha, thanks for talking with me. Now, Justice Sykes raised numerous concerns about the prosecution's case. What are some of those issues?
Thanks for having me, Jovan. One of the concerns raised by Chief Justice Byran Sykes is the failure by the prosecution to bring affirmative and supporting evidence to ground the counts on the indictment. The Chief Justice took issue with the fact that in some of the allegations that are being levied against the defendants, there haven't been affirmative evidence, meaning evidence to prove that what the Crown is saying is in fact true. For example, in one of the counts where the Crown is alleging that the gang allegedly murdered a man called Ice, the prosecution brought no evidence to say that the man had in fact died. There was no funeral program, there was no report, crime scene report. There was nothing to say that he died at any point. So the judge wanted to know what was there to say that this man had in fact died.
So what was the prosecution's response?
The prosecution, in their response, was saying that they acknowledge that they have, in some instances, failed to bring affirmative evidence, but they asked the judge to consider the testimony of the main witness and to decide whether or not it was credible. But of course, the judge was not happy with that, and his expression was that that approach is nonsensical in the 21st century, meaning that instead of asking the judge to make a determination on whether he finds the witness credible, they should in fact bring evidence to prove what they are claiming.
Yes, a lot of people on social media and elsewhere have expressed disappointment in the judge's comments. What do you think about the public's response?
I note the public's response to the judge's queries and admonition of the prosecution and the police. Many of them are saying that he's siding with the defendant, but what is important is for the public to consider that the judge has to rule on what is presented before the court, meaning the judge is making an assessment of what is presented in the indictment, not on what is being alleged outside in the public. And so whatever is in the indictment, the duty rests with the prosecution to bring evidence to prove that is so beyond a reasonable doubt, and the judge can only work with what is presented.
Thank you so much there to Tanisha Mundell, my colleague who's covering the Klansman One Don gang trial in the Supreme Court. United States authorities have declined to confirm the identity of a 5-year-old migrant girl they say drowned in the Colorado River in California on June 6. The news comes as the search continues for 5-year-old Jamaican Malaysia Million Miller, who was separated from her mother, 30-year-old Teresa Stushy Wilson, while being smuggled across the dangerous Mexico-US border on June 5. The Imperial County Sheriff's Office in California confirmed that a child drowned on Monday, June 6, but the coroner's office told the Gleaner that because the deceased is a minor, her name cannot be released. On May 25, Miss Wilson left Jamaica with her 2 daughters for Panama, from where they entered Mexico. The family is from Waterhouse in St. Andrew. 4 of the 5 additional persons held recently in connection with the theft of $46 million from an account at Jamaica money market brokers JMMB Bank after gaining access to sensitive personal data have been charged. 48-year-old Sophia Dobson and 28-year-old Raquel Morrison, both unemployed of Caladium Crescent, Kingston 11, along with 23-year-old Jashon Brown, also unemployed of Penwood Crescent, and 25-year-old warehouse supervisor Everald Mackenzie of a Waltham Avenue address in St Andrew have been charged with various counts of engaging in a transaction involving criminal property and conspiracy to defraud. The alleged criminals were apprehended on Tuesday in a series of joint operations led by the Financial Investigations Division, officers attached to the Constabulary Financial Unit, members of the Counter-Terrorism and Organised Crime Investigations Branch, and members of the St Andrews South Police. The victim had complained to the Financial Investigations Division in March that over the period February 15 to 2025 this year, over 40 wire transfers were executed on his account without his knowledge to the bank accounts of over 30 individuals. Opposition leader Mark Golding has revised his shadow cabinet with Natalie Nita Garvey back in the fold and Senator Damian Crawford taking over as spokesperson on education. The inclusion of Mrs. Nita Garvey is being seen in the party as an effort to heal following the fallout over the election's loss in 2020 and subsequent internal fights. And the PNP is expected to install 2 key backers of the one PNP camp as vice presidents. Gleaner sources say one-time Deputy Michael Phillips, who recently declared his interest in reclaiming the vice presidency, and Donna Scott Motley could assume the positions in the coming weeks in a bid to unite the fractious party. It is unclear whether their leadership bids will be uncontested. However, there is uncertainty about who among Ian Hales, Eugene Kelly, Richard Azan, and Norman Scott will be put aside for peacemaking. PNP General Secretary Dr. Dayton Campbell declined to confirm or deny the developments. And that's it for this edition of Jamaica Now, your weekly review of the big news stories. Send us your comments at onlinefeedback@gleanerjm.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Jamaica Gleaner and on Facebook at Gleaner Jamaica. Like this video on our YouTube page, turn on your notification and subscribe today. I'm Jovan Johnson, and before we go, Prime Minister Andrew Holness has sought to explain why his government is struggling to fight crime. Here's what he had to say this week after the mayhem in Spanish Town, St. Catherine.
You know, I grew up in Spanish Town. I grew up in the heart of Spanish Town. And it is not a place that we want to in any way get out of control. It has the potential, if it is not dealt with strongly and firmly and immediately, to claim many more lives. The level of organized criminal activity there is a national emergency. The social ethic of Jamaica needs to change to match the irresponsible ethic of those who seek to destroy our society. If you make bad decisions, you must face the consequences. So, I speak this way because I need to communicate to the Jamaicans who are very frustrated, who cannot understand why is it that the government doesn't respond. We can't respond because every move we make, there is some legal argument or some political argument being made about the preservation of rights. The rights of who? It is never a debate about the rights of the victims, those people who suffer, those people who are killed, those people who are injured in accidents. It is never a debate about those who have lost loved ones. What about their rights too? But we pay attention. Justice must be blind, but it cannot be deaf. It has to hear the cries of the victims, the people who are suffering. And I can understand that there must be defense of our democracy and our rights. And I can understand, and indeed I am the first defender of that, that we cannot allow an emergency or a disaster to change the liberal nature of our democracy. There's no greater Democrat than myself. But disorder will lead to anarchy. And where we are now with the average person in Jamaica is that if they can't get law, they will settle for order. So those who believe that their very eloquent pronouncements about rights are finding favor with the masses of the people, what they are doing is increasingly alienating the people from the system of justice and law enforcement. I do not have the luxury to be dithering on these matters anymore. We have to act on it. And we have to act to protect the innocent, law-abiding citizens.